Edward Bennett sat quietly on the rusted porch swing of his late grandmother's cabin, the rhythmic creak of the chains a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling within Maple Hollow. It had been just 3 weeks since he inherited the old property. Nestled deep within the woods, and far from the judgmental eyes of society, this was supposed to be a retreat, a sanctuary where he could escape his past and the dark secrets that clung to his name. Liam Bennett, Edward's adopted son, was inside unpacking books and artifacts from their last assignment abroad. The two had seen more than their fair share of strange occurrences and supernatural anomalies, but nothing could have prepared them for the sinister rot lurking beneath the pristine surface of Maple Hollow. The town, with its picket fences, smiling neighbors, and perfectly trimmed hedges, was governed by an HOA unlike any other regime led by the icy and manipulative Karen Whitmore. His grip over the community was as suffocating as it was unseen. It started with small infractions. A letter arrived claiming the cabin's exterior paint was 2 shades too dull for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Next came a citation for the overgrown flowers Edward's grandmother had planted decades ago. Rachel, Edward's close friend and a folklore professor who had been assisting with their research, warned him of Karen's reputation. "She doesn't like outsiders," Rachel had said, sipping her herbal tea with a grimace, "especially not ones who don't bow to her rules." But Edward wasn't one to bow. When another letter demanded they remove the antique weather vane shaped like a raven from the roof, an heirloom from the Bennett line, Edward responded not with compliance but with a letter of his own, citing property rights and historical significance. That's when the real trouble began. Dennis Whitmore, Karen's husband and the enforcer of her will, began lurking around the property at night. Liam caught him once with a flashlight, photographing the property from the woods. The next morning they found their mailbox smashed, and tire tracks leading back toward the main road. But Edward refused to be intimidated. "Let them come," he muttered, placing a protective ward above the front door, an old trick learned from their travels in Romania. Things escalated quickly. A week later, Mrs. Holloway, the kindly neighbor who had once brought them pie, was found sobbing on their porch. "I didn't want to do it," she said, pressing a sealed envelope into Edward's hand. Inside was a formal notice of violations signed by Karen and co-signed by Diana Rosewood, a name Edward hadn't heard before, but would come to know all too well. The notice claimed their property was in breach of no fewer than 12 HOA regulations and would be subject to review by a special neighborhood tribunal. It was laughable, except there was nothing funny about it. The tribunal convened 3 days later in the town hall. Edward, Rachel, and Liam arrived to find the room packed not with neighbors, but with what appeared to be actors playing the roles of residents. He recognized no one. At the center sat Diana Rosewood, a supposed judge whose credentials crumbled under even the slightest scrutiny. But the HOA had power here, more than anyone outside the gates of Maple Hollow could imagine. They ruled against Edward in all counts, fining him thousands of dollars and demanding the immediate removal of unauthorized magical relics. That was their first slip-up. Edward had never mentioned anything magical. "They know," Rachel whispered, her hand tightening around Edward's. "They've been watching us longer than we thought." Edward decided it was time to investigate. That night, he and Liam broke into the HOA office, a pristine white building at the center of town, with locked doors and windows that reflected like mirrors. Inside, they found files rows and rows of them. One drawer was labeled surveillance. Inside were photos of them, time-stamped and annotated. One showed Rachel speaking to a raven on the porch. Another captured Edward sketching a protective sigil. Worse, there were files on neighbors' dossiers detailing weaknesses, fears, habits. "This isn't governance," Liam said. "This is control." They took what they could and left, but the damage was done. The next morning, police cars surrounded the cabin, Bean Cutter, the town's sheriff, and another pawn of Karen's empire, accused Edward of theft and trespassing. Without a warrant, they stormed the property, dragging Liam out in cuffs and placing Rachel under house arrest. Edward stood firm, invoking his rights and demanding a formal hearing, but Karen was already steps ahead. She unveiled a series of doctored videos showing Edward practicing what she claimed were dark rituals. The town turned. Once friendly faces now stared with suspicion. Even Mrs. Holloway stopped waving from across the street. It was Laura Peterson, a local journalist, who provided the first lifeline. She approached Edward under cover of darkness, slipping a flash drive into his hand. "You didn't hear this from me," she whispered, "but they're hiding more than you think." The drive contained hours of audio secret recordings from HOA meetings. In them, Karen discussed neutralizing Edward, removing the Bennett threat, and references to a greater plan called Operation Hollow Purge. Rachel cross-referenced the name and uncovered something chilling. Years ago, the town had experienced a sudden shift. Dozens of families moved out under mysterious circumstances. Property records were erased. "They're not just an HOA," she said. "They're a cult." At the center of it all was Clarissa Hale, a name whispered in the tapes and marked as the benefactor. Digging deeper, Edward discovered Clarissa was the original founder of the HOA, a woman long thought dead. But Clarissa hadn't died. She had simply moved into the shadows, controlling the town through proxies like Karen. Armed with evidence, Edward reached out to Agent Harper Quinn, a federal investigator who had once worked with him on an artifact smuggling case in Cairo. Harper responded instantly, recognizing Clarissa's name and connecting it to several unsolved cases across the country. "You've stumbled onto something massive," she said. "We're moving in, but we need more." That more came in the form of a hidden basement beneath the HOA office. With Rachel and Liam's help, Edward snuck in through the storm drain and found a room filled with artifacts, cursed objects, relics, and binders filled with names. It was a nexus of supernatural control, powered by fear and manipulation. The final piece came when they found the ritual room. At its center was a photo of Edward, burned around the edges, surrounded by wax figures of the trio. They were marked for elimination. That night, Edward made a decision. No more hiding. More retreat. They would expose the truth, burn the lies, and take back Maple Hollow. As the clock struck midnight, he lit the first match. The flames caught quickly, licking the edges of the dark room's walls, casting shadows that danced like spirits across the cursed relics that lined the shelves. Edward Bennett stood back and watched the fire consume the twisted heart of Maple Hollow's rot. Every binder, every photo, every wax effigy burned, reducing decades of control and corruption to ash. Rachel stood at the storm drain entrance, clutching a walkie-talkie. "We're clear," she said, voice steady, despite the tremble in her hands. Liam covered their tracks, wiping cameras and disabling motion sensors on their way out. They didn't look back. By the time the fire department arrived, the basement was gone, swallowed by its own darkness. Official reports labeled it a gas leak explosion. Karen Whitmore cried for the news cameras, blaming vandals and insisting on new HOA-funded security, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Laura Peterson's expos dropped the next day. She uploaded the tapes, the photos, the surveillance evidence, and her interviews with Edward and Rachel. "The Hollow Truth," it was titled. Within hours, it went viral. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended. News vans descended. Karen's carefully curated empire began to crack. Still, Karen did not back down. In fact, she doubled down. Emergency HOA meetings were held. Citizens were told not to speak to the press. Diana Rosewood issued a town-wide curfew under HOA emergency protocols, which Edward quickly challenged in court. But this time, things were different. Agent Harper Quinn arrived in person, backed by federal authority and a full team. She met Edward in the woods behind the cabin, under the cloak of night. "You were right," she said without preamble. "Clarissa Hale's name showed up in black site files, stuff we thought buried forever. You just kicked a hornet's nest that stretches across states." Edward handed her the last of the evidence, a torn page from a grimoire detailing the Hollow Purge ritual, marked with Clarissa's signature in blood. "We need to find her," he said, "and fast." Harper nodded. "We think she's using aliases, but we've narrowed it down to 3 active communities with the same pattern of disappearances, HOA takeovers, and sealed town records. Meanwhile, Dennis Whitmore grew more unstable. Under pressure and paranoia, he began lashing out, confronting neighbors, threatening those who questioned the HOA's orders. Rachel caught him trying to plant something beneath their cabin deck. A quick spell revealed it to be a cursed sigil meant to rot foundations and invite madness. They returned it with interest, leaving it on Karen's doorstep wrapped in a mirror charm. That night, Karen screamed loud enough for the entire block to hear. Things escalated from there. Dean Cutter, the sheriff, was caught deleting police logs and rerouting 911 calls that mentioned the HOA. Harper issued a warrant and Cutter was arrested mid-shift. It was a blow to Karen's structure of control. One by one, the dominoes fell. Mrs. Holloway came forward publicly, revealing how she'd been blackmailed by Karen for years. She'd been forced to file false complaints, spy on neighbors, and even pose as a witness in bogus HOA hearings. Her tearful confession went viral. Support poured in. But Karen still had one card left to play. She called in Diana Rosewood, who had fled town after the tribunal. Diana resurfaced with a forged federal document claiming that Edward and Rachel were fugitives from a classified operation overseas. But Harper anticipated the move. She intercepted the false orders and presented them in federal court, stripping Diana of any judicial pretense. The judge ordered a full federal audit of Maple Hollow's HOA operations. Karen was livid, desperate. And when desperate people are cornered, they do dangerous things. One night, as Edward and Liam returned from gathering herbs near the forest edge, they found the cabin doors ajar. Inside, Rachel was missing. A crude note carved into the wood read, "Enough." Edward knew instantly. Karen had taken her. They searched every known HOA property. Nothing. It wasn't until Liam remembered the old foundation plans, his grandmother's journals, that they realized the Whitmore estate had hidden tunnels dating back to Prohibition. The final confrontation began underground. Edward and Liam descended through a collapsed cellar entrance, winding through stone corridors beneath the town. They heard voices ahead, Karen's, cold and venomous, and Rachel's calm despite the threat. As they crept closer, Edward saw the ritual circle. Clarissa Hale herself was there, frail but furious. Attempting to siphon something from Rachel using ancient runes. "This ends now," Edward growled, stepping into the circle. Clarissa's eyes widened. "You," she hissed. "You're the legacy she warned me about." Edward stepped forward, unwrapping a cloth from his pocket to reveal the Ravenstone powerful relic his grandmother had left behind. Its light flared, breaking the ritual. Chaos erupted. Liam tackled Karen as she lunged for Rachel. Edward faced Clarissa, their powers clashing in a storm of light and shadow. Walls shook, runes shattered. The tunnel threatened to collapse. A final move, Edward slammed the Ravenstone into the ground. A shockwave pulsed through the earth, severing the bindings of the ritual and banishing Clarissa in a scream of light. When the dust cleared, she was gone. Karen lay unconscious. Rachel was free, and Edward stood at the center, the Ravenstone cracked, but victorious in his hand. They emerged from the tunnels to a dawn-lit town. Harper and her agents were waiting. "We tracked the surge," she said. "Guess we found our epicenter." Karen and Clarissa's records were seized. The HOA was disbanded. New leadership formed under citizen vote. And Edward, he didn't leave, stayed. Rachel turned the cabin into a research sanctuary. Liam began documenting their journey. And Edward watched over Maple Hollow not as a fugitive, not as a victim, but as its quiet, watchful protector. Edward watched over Maple Hollow not as a fugitive, not as a victim, but as its quiet, watchful protector. The town changed in small ways first. The fences weren't quite as perfectly aligned, but the hedges grew a little freer and the nervous tension that once clung to every neighborhood sidewalk began to ease. Harper Quinn stayed in town for the first few weeks following Clarissa's banishment and Karen's arrest. Her team worked around the clock to uncover the full scope of the HOA's infiltration. What they found stunned even seasoned agents' ears. Forged documents manipulated property transfers. Audio tapes of residents being coerced into silence or false complaints. and even blueprints for similar HOA takeovers planned for neighboring communities. Clarissa had ambitions far beyond Maple Hollow, Harper explained during one of their evening debriefs at the cabin. Rachel, sitting cross-legged beside Edward, nodded gravely. Wow. She wanted control. Not just magical, but societal. She was building her own empire of obedience. With Karen under federal custody and Clarissa's presence seemingly wiped from this plane, the question became, would it stay that way? Liam, curious and cautious, began researching historical instances of similar disappearances and returns. These types don't stay gone, he told Edward one night while scrolling through archived journals and esoteric forums. They rest. They wait. They rebuild in the dark. It didn't take long before they found something troubling. In a small, distant town called Silver Grove, 3 states over, a nearly identical HOA structure had appeared. Overnight, it seemed, the bylaws matched Clarissa's phrasing verbatim. A woman named Eliza Rayburn had assumed the presidency, and residents were already reporting increased surveillance and unexplained vanishings of personal property. It's her, Rachel said flatly. Clarissa's spirit, or at least her design, is still moving. Harper couldn't act without more proof. She left Maple Hollow with a promise to Edward. If he found anything concrete, she'd mobilize her team again. So the trio prepared. Edward turned the cabin's basement into a war room. Its maps lined the walls, with red threads connecting. Similar HOA reports, whispering cult activity in ancient ley line patterns. Rachel cataloged every artifact they'd recovered, cleansing and sealing those still saturated with dark energy. Liam developed a digital monitoring system, a quiet ping, alert anytime certain phrases or rituals appeared online or in municipal documentation. It was only 2 months later when the ping arrived. Night of the Hollow Moon appeared in the bylaws of a gated community just west of Silver Grove. That's a ritual alignment, Rachel whispered, checking her notes. It's the same night Clarissa tried to drain me. Edward didn't hesitate. We're going. They packed. Carefully, relics, research, cleansing agents, charms. Edward armed himself with a modified bracer that concealed both a blade and an energy trigger, a gift from an old contact in Munich. Rachel wore a necklace imbued with protection spells crafted from dragonbone ash and willow bark. Liam carried the Ravenstone fragments, now stored in a sealed obsidian box to avoid leaking energy. Silver Grove felt familiar in the worst way. Clean streets, plastic smiles. Too many cameras on too many posts. Their rental house sat at the far end of the neighborhood, shielded by trees and distant from the central clubhouse. Their first step was quiet observation. Posing as potential buyers, they attended a welcome luncheon hosted by Eliza Rayburn. Her voice was smooth, but her eyes were cold. Edward caught her glancing twice at Rachel's necklace. That night, Liam hacked into the clubhouse's security feed. What they saw chilled them. Beneath the gym floor was a staircase, and beneath that, another chamber stone-lined. Runes etched deep into the walls and a circle prepared with wax and bone. They're preparing for another ritual, Rachel murmured. And there, farther along than Clarissa was, they had only days. Edward reached out to Harper again. She couldn't deploy without jurisdiction, but she could offer support, digital tracking, fake credentials, and access to emergency evac teams. The next day, Edward and Rachel infiltrated the chamber disguised as HOA volunteers. They used forged badges Harper's team provided and managed to blend into a late-night meeting. What they heard confirmed everything. Eliza wasn't just reviving Clarissa's plans, she was accelerating them. The hollow moon shall rise not in darkness, but in unity, she intoned to her followers. Our roots stretch wider than the Ravenstone's curse. Our era begins now. Rachel tensed beside Edward. She's referencing the Ravenstone. She knows it's broken. Edward's mind raced. She was building something new, something not bound by the same magic kit, might be immune to the protections they had used before. They needed a new strategy. That night, they summoned an old ally, a relic smith named Juno Kale from Iceland. Juno arrived within 2 days, bearing with her a case of neutral wards and a newly forged device capable of absorbing ritual energy and redirecting it. "I call it the mirror shard," she said. "It'll hurt like hell if you're caught in the loop, but it'll reflect anything aimed at you magically." Time was running out. The ritual was set for the night of the hollow moon, now only 3 days away. Their plan was simple: infiltrate the chamber, place mirror shards at each corner of the sigil, interrupt Eliza's invocation, and expose the HOA's inner circle to Harper's team, who would be watching via a hacked satellite feed. Simple never meant easy. On the eve of the ritual, they were discovered. Eliza's second-in-command, a towering man named Markenvelt, recognized Edward from a decade-old UN tribunal photo. He triggered an alarm. The trio fled through back alleys and over fences, reaching the edge of the neighborhood woods where they'd parked an escape bike. Marken followed. The fight was brutal. Edward took a hit to the ribs that cracked something inside. Rachel used her necklace as a whip, lashing it around Marken's arm to yank him down. Liam, panicked but focused, detonated a flash ward that disoriented their pursuer long enough to escape. "We don't have time to regroup," Edward wheezed, as Rachel wrapped his torso. "We go in tomorrow, no matter what." Harper called that night.
"My team will be watching."
"We've routed live surveillance to your contact lenses. The second you place the shards, signal us." The ritual night came. Fog rolled across Silver Grove like an omen. The clubhouse glowed from within. Edward, Rachel, and Liam slipped through a rear entrance during the ceremonial procession. Disguised as attendees, they navigated the stone tunnels, placing mirror shards in secret. But as Rachel lowered the final shard, Eliza's voice rang out. "I see you, Bennett." The crowd turned. Eliza stood on the dais, clad in ceremonial black, her fingers glowing with sickly purple light. "Did you think you could stop me twice?" "You're not Clarissa," Edward said, stepping forward, hands raised. "You're just another shadow trying to wear her crown." "No," Elisa replied, "I'm her heir, and you're my sacrifice." With a shriek, she launched a bolt of pure energy at him. The mirror shards activated. The bolt arced, bent, and slammed back into her circle. The chamber shook, runes cracked, ritual lines bled. Harper's voice rang in Edward's ear. "We see it, we're moving in." As Eliza staggered, Rachel rushed forward and threw a binding charm. It latched onto Eliza's arm, dragging her down. Liam triggered the secondary mirror surge. Bursts of light filled the chamber. And then, silence. Eliza lay unconscious, her followers dazed. Edward knelt, breathing hard, blood seeping from his side. Harper's team burst through moments later, fully armed. "You did it," she said, kneeling beside him. "You actually did it." But Edward, grim-faced, shook his head. "No, we stopped this one, but there's more. There's always more." "No, we stopped this one, but there's more. There's always more." Orient words echoed in the debrief room long after the operation concluded. Harper sat across from him, arms crossed, her face unreadable as agents filed reports and bagged confiscated relics. Rachel, bandaged but alert, reviewed the footage from their contact lenses frame by frame. Liam hovered by the doorway, his laptop balanced on one arm, already scanning news sources and encrypted forums for mentions of similar HOA activities. Silver Grove had been just another piece on a much larger board. That much was clear. Clarissa Hale's network, whether mystical, ideological, or something worse, had outlived her. Eliza Rayburn had called herself an heir, but Edward suspected. There were others. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Harper leaned forward. "We're finding blueprints. Property registrations with matching bylaws. There's a pattern here. Same names, same designs, all over the country. A franchise of manipulation." Rachel muttered. Edward nodded. "We can't just wait for it to come to us again. We take the fight to them." And so began the next phase. The Raven Watch Initiative. Edward, Rachel, Liam, and Harper formed the core of the team, operating in secrecy, identifying targets, mapping influence networks, and intercepting would-be rituals before they could begin. It was exhausting, dangerous work. They barely slept. Their team rotated through rental properties and safe houses every 2 weeks, but they were making a difference. In Westbrook Pines, they stopped a blood-binding ceremony disguised as a homeowner's Spring Gala Glen. They uncovered a hidden tunnel beneath a rec center, its walls lined with stone masks used for soul siphoning. In Crossvale, they dismantled a relic exchange where cursed heirlooms were traded like currency among HOA elites. But the deeper they went, the darker it got. They found a town with no children, another where everyone over the age of 60 had vanished within the same year. A village whose HOA president never left her house, yet ruled with absolute authority. Through a web of intermediaries who appeared and disappeared at will, they began seeing symbols that hadn't appeared in Clarissa's writing's new sigils. Variations twisted, reimaginings. "They're evolving," Rachel said late one night, eyes red-rimmed from study. "This isn't just Clarissa's legacy anymore. It's mutating." One town, Sycamore Ridge, hit harder than the rest. The HOA there wasn't hiding, they were celebrating. Open rituals, public cleansings, new neighbors forced to participate or be exiled. Their leader, Julian Marrow, claimed the title of Custodian of Order and had built a massive stone monolith at the town's center. Edward's team went in with full federal support only to walk into a trap. The monolith wasn't just a symbol, it was a siphon. When Harper's team approached, it activated, drawing energy and memory from every agent in range. Rachel collapsed. Liam screamed as the Ravenstone fragments trembled violently inside their container. Edward lunged for the monolith and slammed a purification charm into its base. It shattered in a burst of blinding white. The entire town went silent. People fell to their knees. Others simply stared, dazed. When the dust settled, Harper's team was fractured. 2 agents lost years of memory. 1 vanished entirely. "We weren't ready," Harper admitted afterward. "Thought we'd seen the worst." He hadn't. They regrouped at an old monastery in Colorado, one of the last safe zones free from HOA influence. Edward took a week of silence, meditating beneath the carved ravens of the main hall. Rachel and Liam began assembling a database of all recorded sigils, rituals, and HOA bylaws, cross-referenced with known anomalies. And that's when they found it. A town that shouldn't exist. Oakshade. It appeared on no maps. No state records. But it had property tax filings and HOA regulations. Its board was signed by someone named Cassandra Vale. "Another heir?" Liam asked. "No," Rachel said. "A founder." Edward's pulse quickened. The documents linked Oakshade to land once owned by Clarissa Hale's great-grandfather. A shadow town, built as a fallback, a sanctuary. "This might be where she was born," Rachel whispered. "Or reborn." They prepared like never before. No tech that could be traced, only analog equipment, old-fashioned lockpicks and charms. Bound in silver and obsidian, Edward carried a dagger, blessed by 3 different spiritual leaders. Rachel wore armor stitched with incantations from 13 languages. Liam had a briefcase full of salt grenades, mirror lenses, and a collapsible kinetic barrier rigged into a backpack. They approached Oakshade from the east, hiking through thick woods, until the tree line broke into a perfect circle, town preserved like a snow globe. No one smiled. No one waved, but everyone watched. Silent eyes from behind lace curtains, in frosted windows. They posed as surveyors assessing land value. It gave them access to key areas of the town square, a false library that was really a meeting hall, and the church that stood silent but ever-present. At night, strange sounds filled the air. Laughter that didn't echo. Bells that rang without. Movement. Lights flickering in impossible sequences. And always the raven, perched atop street lamps, fence posts, mailboxes watching. "It's not just a symbol here," Rachel said. "It's real. It's sentient." And on the 5th night, they found the hollow, a sinkhole behind the town's only grocery store, sealed with iron bars and lined with bones. The air buzzed with energy. "It's their heart," Edward said. "The source. They planned to destroy it." But Cassandra Vale had been watching. She met them in the hollow on the 6th night. Pale, ageless, eyes like obsidian glass. She carried the raven's stain, she said to Edward. "You broke the circle, and now you seek to break the root." You're not a guardian, Edward said. You're a parasite. I am balance, she replied. The chaos you flee follows you because you're a beacon, a wound that never heals. Rachel stepped between them. We're ending this. Tonight, Cassandra smiled, then be consumed. She raised her hand. The ground opened, the bones glowed, and the hollow came alive. She raised her hand. The ground opened. The bones glowed. The hollow came alive. From beneath the earth, a wailing mist surged upward, carrying with it the shrieks of voices not heard in generations. Rachel shielded her eyes as the energy ripped through the sinkhole like a cyclone. Liam stumbled back, barely activating the kinetic barrier in time to avoid being dragged into the spiral of bone and ash. Edward stood firm, the blessed dagger drawn, its runes glowing hot in his grip. Now he shouted, hurling the first purification seal into the pit. The seal struck a bone and exploded in a pulse of golden fire, disrupting the rising vortex for a moment. Cassandra Vale didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped forward, arms outstretched, as if embracing the hollow. But this is not a place of death, she intoned. It is a cradle of rebirth. You trespass upon sacred renewal. Rachel answered by casting a binding ward. Silver tendrils lashed out from her fingertips, wrapping around Cassandra's legs and anchoring her to the soil. The ground hissed beneath her feet. You can't rebirth what was never alive, Rachel growled. This is theft. This is desecration. The hollow retaliated. Spines of bone jutted upward from the rim, slicing through the dirt and lashing toward them like spears. Liam threw a salt grenade, and the explosion of purified air cracked the bone tendrils into ash. Cassandra let out a screech, her human facade flickering for a heartbeat. Beneath her skin, Edward caught a glimpse of something ancient beyond human, all angles and voids and hunger. She's not of this world, Edward murmured. She never was. Then let's send her back, Rachel hissed. Together, they circled the sinkhole, activating the mirror shards they had embedded earlier that day. Each shard pulsed with stolen light from rituals past, calibrated to reflect dark essence and reverse sigil flow. The moment the fourth shard lit up, the hollow trembled. A rift opened in the center, and voices poured out names, screams, chanceled those sacrificed through generations of HOA control and false order. Cassandra howled, dropping to her knees. You don't understand, she cried, her voice no longer human. Without the hollow, the boundary breaks. You'll bring the others through. We'll take that risk, Edward said, slamming the final shard into the ground. The rift twisted, imploding in a blast of violet light that knocked them backward. When the smoke cleared, the sinkhole was gone. In its place, scorched earth. Cassandra lay unmoving, her body crumpled like paper. But as Harper's team arrived moments later, drawn by the ritual's energy spike, Edward noticed something. A trail of dark ichor leading from Cassandra's body toward the forest. She's not dead, he said grimly. She shed the skin. She'll find another. Harper sighed. Then we stay ready. The team returned to the monastery, bruised but alive. The operation made national news, reported as a cult raid in a closed compound with no details given. But word spread. Survivors from Maple Hollow, Silver Grove, and other liberated towns began reaching out. Some had stories, others had maps. One brought a relic, a pendant made of pressed ash and obsidian bearing the mark of the original Raven cult. It's older than we thought, Liam said, examining the pendant. This didn't start with Clarissa. It's pre-colonial. It's pre-colonial. Rachel proposed the idea of a sanctuary somewhere neutral, protected, where knowledge and resources could be stored. Not just a base, but a library, a warded community. Edward agreed. We need to stop reacting. We need to prepare. The Raven Watch relocated to an abandoned weather station atop Stonecrest Peak, a place known for its natural anomalies and ley line intersections. Over months, they turned it into Haven's Rest, the first sanctuary, wards woven into every wall, relic chambers buried in the rock, and a library where stories were preserved not as myths but as warnings. Liam developed a public-facing version of their database, the Hollow Ledger. Disguised as a paranormal blog, It quietly detailed town patterns, HOA anomalies, and open cases. Within weeks, tips poured in. One story stood out. A boy named Elijah from Briar's Hollow had drawn a map in crayon showing underground tunnels and marked bad people in suits. His mother uploaded it with a note. He says they have meetings, he hears chanting. Can you help? Rachel traced the coordinates. The layout matched the original foundation beneath Maple Hollow. It's happening again, she whispered. Another seed town. Edward called a council at Haven's Rest. They were tired. Scars ran deep, but not one of them flinched. Go again, Edward said. For Elijah, for everyone still in the dark. We go again, Edward said. For Elijah, for everyone still in the dark. That simple call to action sparked the next operation. Preparations for Briar's Hollow began immediately. Rachel reviewed topographic overlays of the town while Harper coordinated. With embedded federal contacts, Liam scoured municipal databases, comparing tax records, HOA documentation, and community event permits. What emerged was chilling. Briar's Hollow mirrored Maple Hollow, almost perfectly an artificially high homeowner turnover rate. Private HOA, board with undisclosed leadership, bylaws updated quarterly with cryptic phrasing like the binding. Ceremonies shall remain intact, and suspicious land developments surrounding the town's western ridge. There's something buried there, Liam concluded. They're building on top of it, like a seal. Harper couldn't move her team in without cause, but she could provide covert extraction plans, encrypted comms, and emergency airlift. Options. The Raven Watch would go in first. Infiltration began with Edward and Rachel posing as a married couple moving into the neighborhood. Liam played their son, complete with forged school records and fabricated social media profiles. They chose a modest house on Willow Creek Drive, close enough to the western ridge but far enough from the HOA clubhouse to avoid immediate scrutiny. Surveillance was constant. Drones hovered over backyards. Mail was pre-screened before it ever reached their box. Every conversation outside the home felt monitored. They're more paranoid here, Rachel said. Something's not going according to plan, and they're scrambling to contain it. Elijah's family had vanished days before their arrival. The note his mother posted had been scrubbed from the Hollow ledger, and all inquiries routed to dead servers. Rachel found traces of emergency energy wards around their former home, evidence they'd been taken, not relocated. The trio traced the tunnels Elijah drew back to an old maintenance facility near the ridge. Disguised as power inspectors, they accessed the service hatch. What they found beneath confirmed their worst fears. A chamber, circular and symmetrical, lined with mirrors etched in blood and gold. Symbols pulsed along the stone similar to those from Oakshade, but more refined, almost perfected. This isn't just another site, Rachel whispered. This is central. Maybe a keystone. In the chamber's center stood a statue, a robed figure with no face, arms raised skyward, its hands open like a gateway. That's not Clarissa, Edward said. It's someone else. Liam found documentation hidden in a rusted cabinet, a journal labeled the Veil Ascension Doctrine. Inside, it outlined the process of transferring HOA influence into local governance using sigils embedded in public policy language and ritualized bureaucracy. They're institutionalizing the control, Liam said. They're embedding it into law. The fourth night they were discovered. A man in a gray suit approached their home, not as an enforcer, but as a messenger. He slid a letter. Under their Duran invitation to an HOA summit at the clubhouse, mandatory attendance. Rachel opened the envelope with tongs, scanning for embedded curses. It's laced with perception charms. They want to manipulate what we see. Edward sighed. Then we go. We wear the lenses. The next evening they arrived at the clubhouse, cloaked in protective enchantments and equipped with Raven Watch Contact's microlenses. Embedded with real-time memory recorders, the room inside glowed with opulence, chandeliers humming with ambient energy. At the front stood the faceless statue's real-life counterpart, a woman with no visible eyes, her face masked with a veil of obsidian mesh. Welcome, she said, voice echoing unnaturally. I am the Arbiter. Tonight, we discuss permanence. One by one, other members stood, and voiced support for eternal enforcement. Binding rituals and real estate agreements, and the Ascension Clause. A contract clause that tied a family's property rights to their compliance with ceremonial participation. Edward could barely contain his fury. When it was his turn to speak, he smiled thinly. I propose a new clause. One involving exposure. And with that, Liam triggered a beacon from the lenses. Images from the chamber, Elijah's drawing, the statue, and the doctrine were uploaded in real time to the Hollow Ledger. Harper's team began a wide-scale intercept, but the Arbiter moved faster. Traitors, she hissed. With a sweep of her hand, the walls peeled back, revealing that the clubhouse was not just a hall, but a living sigil. The floor shifted. The lights turned crimson. Guests around them transformed them into pale, elongated figures with clawed hands, others into spectral wraiths bound by chains of glowing script. We run, Edward shouted. Liam activated the kinetic field. Rachel unleashed a chain of glyphs that stunned the wraiths. They broke through a side exit, darting across yards and leaping fences, until they reached the maintenance facility. They needed to destroy the statue. It was the conduit. Inside the chamber, the statue now pulsed. With dark energy, the Arbiter's voice rang in their ears despite her absence. You defy the cycle. You will be unmade. Edward raised the blessed dagger and charged. The statue resisted. A barrier of force knocked him back. Rachel hurled a soul flare, grenade of light essence harvested from purified relics. It cracked the barrier. Liam dropped a salt grenade at the statue's feet. The explosion rocked the chamber. Cracks appeared along the statue's base. Edward rose, bleeding, and plunged the dagger into the heart of the robed figure. The energy, released, sent a shockwave through the tunnels. The mirrors shattered, the glyphs reversed. The statue exploded in a burst of blue fire. The HOA's sigil network collapsed. Across town, drones crashed, surveillance feeds died. People staggered. In the streets, freed from mental bindings, the Arbiter's scream echoed through the walls, then fell silent. When the dust settled, the chamber was gone. All that remained was scorched stone and ash. They returned to Haven's Rest to find Harper waiting. You exposed them, she said. That footage people are waking up, but Edward didn't smile. This was just one node, one heart. There's more, Rachel said. Now they know we're coming. There's more, Rachel said. And now they know we're coming. That single sentence set the course for the final phase of Ravenwatch's mission. Edward stood at the map wall in Haven's Rest, pins and string charting the fractures across the nation-silent HOAs, harboring ancient energies, suburban enclaves wrapped in invisible chains, and whispers of a final assembly, a convergence event known only as the Equinox Rite. The term had surfaced in dozens of intercepted communiques, often paired with sigils resembling constellations inverted and reversed. They're planning something nationwide, Liam said, fingers flying across his keyboard. This isn't isolated anymore. It's synchronized. Ritual spanning multiple HOA towns, Rachel added. Like flipping a circuit breaker. On society, Harper initiated federal lockdown protocols. Safe zones were established in reclaimed towns, and families rescued from HOA influence were relocated under new identities. Meanwhile, Ravenwatch mobilized its full network former. Agents, mystics, scholars, and survivors. Each sworn to end the curse of the Raven for good. The first target, Crestfall Summit, a mountaintop neighborhood built around an ancient Karen site, now repurposed as an HOA office. Beneath the polished oak desks and leather chairs lay relics masks, obsidian shards, and a binding scroll sealed with flesh ink. Rachel identified the Karen as an amplification node. If activated during the rite, it would boost the ritual's reach exponentially. The team dismantled it in 12 hours. Next came Greenbrier Hollow, where homeowners were unknowingly participating in a renewal pledge that mirrored a soul-bonding rite. They intervened during the ceremony, placing the final chant with a reversal incantation that caused the entire town to awaken mid-ritual, disoriented but free. One by one, Ravenwatch disrupted the infrastructure. But the closer they got to the rite's anchor point, the more resistance they faced. Agents vanished. Towns turned hostile. And in a chilling development, several symbols began appearing. In Raven Watch Safe Zones proof, the enemy had located them in return. "We're in a race now," Harper said grimly. "We stop the anchor, or the right completes." The anchor point was traced to a seemingly innocuous cul-de-sac in Havenbrook. Pine's a newly constructed HOA community built atop a site of geological convergence and historical trauma. The HOA there, led by a man named Elias Thorne, operated with an eerie precision. No violations. No visible enforcement, yet compliance was total. "This is it," Edward said. "The eye of the right." They entered Havenbrook under aliases, posing as federal surveyors checking for mineral rights. Disputes. What they found beneath the town's central park chilled them. A chamber built in perfect geometric harmony. Its walls lined with mirrors, the ceiling open to the sky in the shape of the Raven sigil. "It's a convergence chamber," Rachel whispered. "This is where they'll finalize the right." Liam accessed Thorne's files through a compromised HOA server. The right was scheduled for the night of the vernal equinox 3 days away. Harper authorized full strike protocol. But Edward had another idea. "Let them start the right," he said. "We reverse it mid-ritual. Let the energy build, then collapse it inward. Make the system devour itself." Risky. But with precise timing and the proper counter-sigil, it could work. They spent the next 48 hours preparing. Obsidian runes were hidden beneath the chamber floor. Reverse glyphs were etched into sewer grates and storm drains. Liam programmed a cascade failsafe into the HOA's smart grid system. When the night came, they watched from the rooftops as the town gathered. Thorne stood in ceremonial robes, surrounded by HOA officials from across the country. Each carried a relic proof of their town's participation. As the chant began, the sky shimmered. Stars shifted, time slowed. Edward felt the air tighten like a held breath. At the apex of the ritual, Edward signaled. Rachel activated the reversal seal. Liam detonated the failsafe. The chamber lit up in blinding white. Thorne screamed as his robe caught fire. Mirrors shattered. The air imploded. And then silence. The right had collapsed in on itself, creating a vacuum that erased the convergence field. HOA leaders fled. The Raven mark vanished from the sky. Across the country, sigils went dormant. The cursed relics disintegrated. Ritual sites cracked and burned. The network was broken. Raven Watch returned to Haven's Rest, exhausted but victorious. Survivors sent messages of thanks. Families reunited. Children woke from years of silence. It's a hollow ledger published. A final entry: the Raven sleeps. Edward sat alone on the overlook, staring at the stars. Rachel joined him, her hand warm in his. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Edward didn't answer immediately. He watched a single raven soar across the night sky, then disappear into the dark. "It's resting," he said. "We'll be watching." Harper joined them with Liam and a new recruiter girl rescued from Havenbrook, who'd been drawing ward. "Sigils since she was 5. We're rebuilding," Harper said. "Raven Watch isn't just a team anymore. It's a legacy." "What so?" In the quiet shadow of battle, the protectors stood vigilant. No longer hidden, no longer reactive, but ready. The suburbs had slept for too long. The neighborhood watched back.